can, we'd like to turn to Psalm 23. Psalm 23, looking at verse 4, Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Again, a life of God's comforting presence. And this would be part 3 on thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. To comfort is to strengthen the mind, to give new vigor to the spirit, to relieve, to assist, to encourage. We've seen, by way of review, we've seen the need of comfort is found in the frailty and troubles of man. The frailty of man is his impoverished, defective, deficient, and weak natural state. Just by what man is by nature makes him in need of comfort. Add to his natural state, he in that state experiences a variety of trouble, a variety of difficulties and afflictions and sorrows. David expressed his frailty and his need throughout the 23rd Psalm. Every line of the 23rd Psalm speaks of our need, speaks of our need of comfort, speaks of the fact that we are needy creatures. The very first line, the Lord is my shepherd, the very fact that we need a shepherd says something about our nature and where we would go without that shepherd. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. We don't even know where the green pastures are. And if we did, we wouldn't have the sense to lie down in them. We don't know how to rest. So every line of the 23rd Psalm speaks of the frailty and the need of man. So the need of comfort is found in the frailty and the troubles of man. We see that God is the source of comfort. He is the one who comes to our aid. He is the one who provides support and gives us relief. And then last week we began to look at the means of comfort. And we find that in these words, thy rod and thy staff. The means of comfort is seen in the two words, rod and staff. And the key to the rod and the staff is the twice repeated pronoun thy. Thy rod and thy staff. And as we pointed out last week, it would be grammatically correct to say, thy rod and staff comfort me. The second thy is not necessary, but it's there for a reason. It's thy rod, thy staff. Again, grammatically, it could be thy rod and staff. But it's thy rod, thy staff. Because he's putting the emphasis. The emphasis isn't so much on the rod and staff. The emphasis is on the fact that it's his. It's the shepherd's rod. It's the shepherd's staff. In other words, the rod and staff in the hand of the shepherd is his comfort. And then he says, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Again, they would go back to thy staff, thy rod. The they isn't necessary to be grammatically correct, but again, it's emphasis. He's emphasizing the importance of it's thy rod, thy staff, they, thy rod, thy staff, comfort me. There's no comfort in the rod and staff apart from the shepherd, apart from them being in the shepherd's hand. So, the Lord, the shepherd, He skillfully uses the rod and the staff on each of His sheep for the well-being of His own. It's always for the well-being of His own. And last week we began to look at the rod. Again, I believe he's talking about two different instruments here. It's not one instrument, it's two. The rod and the staff. And a rod was more like a club. It was something that was, again, it's translated scepter many times in the Old Testament. So it speaks of power. It speaks of authority. It was used for, the rod was used for protection, and it was used for discipline of the sheep. So it speaks of authority and rule. And there is great comfort in the authority and rule of the Lord as our shepherd. He's in charge of the flock. He has authority over the flock. He has rule over the flock. The sheep never rule the shepherd. That would be dysfunction. But the shepherd has authority. The shepherd has rule. There's comfort in the authority and rule of the Lord as our shepherd. There's no comfort if you take away the authority and rule of the Lord. Then you have no God, and there's no comfort. The rod speaks again, as we've already said, of protection. It was used in the defense of the sheep. The shepherd would use it to drive off wild animals, defend against enemies trying to steal the sheep. There's great comfort in the protection of the Lord. We saw also that the rod is used to number the sheep, and we referred to Leviticus 27, verse 32, to come under the rod. That's how the shepherd would count his sheep, which speaks of his possession of the sheep. He owns the sheep. And again, there's great comfort in belonging to the Lord's flock, in belonging, in feeding in the Lord's pastures. The rod also speaks of discipline. And that's where we closed last week. It was a tool of chastisement to provide teaching and correction. The shepherd would not use the rod to just beat the sheep just for the sake of beating the sheep, but he would do that for teaching purposes, correcting purposes. And every time the Lord chastises us, again, we need to hear the rod. We need to hear the rod. Malachi 6 or Micah 6 verse 9. Hear the rod. Hear what it's saying. We need to learn the lessons. That's what it's for, teaching and correction. And that brings us to the rod was also used to examine the sheep. It was used to part the wool of the sheep, and the shepherd would do that, of course, to examine for parasites, to examine for sores and any sign of problems in the sheep. And there's great comfort in the examination of the Lord. Many look at that as just something of discomfort for the Lord to examine us. But if we're where we ought to be, and if we're what we ought to be, we ought to desire for the Lord to examine us for the first signs of parasites, for the first signs of sores, for any sign of problem whatsoever. Notice in 1 Chronicles chapter 28. 1 Chronicles chapter 28. Verse 29. 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9. 1 Chronicles 28, 9. And thou, Solomon, my son, know thou the God of thy father. Serve him, and if you truly know him, you will, these things will follow suit. Serve him with a perfect heart, with a willing mind. Because the reason you need to serve him with a perfect heart and willing mind is the Lord searcheth all hearts. He knows what is true service and what isn't. And if the heart isn't in it, it's not true. And understandeth all the imaginations of the thoughts. God knows every thought that we have, but He also understands. What that means is that He knows why. He knows why we think what we think. He knows why we imagine what we imagine. And that gets back, of course, to our sinfulness, our depravity. If thou seek Him, okay, this should be the result of the Lord examining. If thou seek Him, He will be found of thee. But if thou forsake Him, He will cast thee off forever. Then notice in Psalm 139. Psalm 139 and verse 1. He's talking to the Lord, but he makes a statement. O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. God knows. God knows. There isn't a person on the planet that if they knew every thought you have, every thought that's ever crossed your mind, there wouldn't be a person on the planet that would have a thing to do with any of us. But the Lord knows. The Lord knows. And so He makes this statement. It's an amazing statement because it magnifies the grace of the Lord. But then notice He makes a request. Verse 19. Surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. For they speak against thee wickedly, and thine enemies. I just want verse 23 and 24. Search me. This is the request. Search me, O God. All right, he's already stated that the Lord has done that and that the Lord knows him. But now he prays, search me, O God. In other words, continue to search me, O God. Know my heart. Try me. Put me to the test. And know my thoughts. And see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. The examination by the shepherd was a great comfort to the psalmist, and it should be to us. as well. You should not be afraid to be examined by the shepherd, by the Lord. Most people are. Most don't want any part of that. But the Lord already knows. But He prays that, search me, O Lord. That is for my benefit. Cause me to know about myself what you already know. Then in Jeremiah 17 and verse 10, I, the Lord, search the heart. And we ought to want the Lord to do that. If we're sincere about being right with God, then we want the Lord to search us. And we find comfort because of the end result. I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings. So the rod was used to examine the sheep. The rod was also used to clear the way for the sheep. Many times in the life of a child of God, we see no way. We're in a quandary. We don't know which way to go. We don't see a way. God tells us to do something, and we think, I can't do that. That's impossible. There's no way. There's no way. So there are times when we do not see the way. There are times that we do not know the way. But though we do not see the way, and though we may not know the way, the Lord always has a way. And the Lord is the way. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way. God is the way. He has a way, and He makes a way through. When we think there's no way we can do this, there's no way this can happen, the Lord makes a way through. And that's the picture here. The rod was used to clear the way, clear the brush, clear away the obstacles. God bringing the Israelites across in the Red Sea is a perfect example of God making a way. God always had the way. The children of Israel could see no way through. But God makes a way. God makes a way through. It's not up to you and I to make a way. It's not up to us to make things happen. God already has a way. And we need to do like God told the Israelites, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Oh, we'd see a lot of things if we just stand still and shut our mouths for a while and just watch the Lord. Stand still and see. So God has a way. He knows the way. And when there appears to be no way, He makes that way obvious to us. So that brings us to the staff. Thy rod, the rod in the hand of God, the rod in the hand of the shepherd. And now we come to thy staff. The staff was a slender stick, several feet long, with a crook or hook at one end. The Hebrew word is mishnaneth, mishineth. And it means a walking stick or a support. So we need to get that image in our mind. Thy rod, thy staff. Okay, get the picture of a walking stick. A cane, except it would be taller than the canes that we know of today. And this is seen, notice in Exodus chapter 21. Exodus 21, verse 19. if he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff. Okay, it's referring to a walking stick. That's what he's referring to there in Exodus 21. And that's what we have here in Psalm 23. It's the same word. So we need to get that picture in our mind of a walking stick. Now notice in 2 Kings 18, 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 21. Now he's rebuking them for trusting in the wrong things. Now behold, thou trustest upon the staff. Okay, that's the same word. Thy rod and thy staff. Thou trustest upon the staff of this bruised reed. So, of this bruised reed would refer to a stick that cannot support anything. He's rebuking them for their trust. Even upon Egypt, on which if a man lean, if you're going to lean upon this staff, if you're going to trust in this staff, it will go into his hand and pierce it. That is, when that stick breaks, it's going to go into his hand, and he's going to be wounded. He's rebuking false trust. But the point here is that he uses this word staff. This word staff. And then notice over in Isaiah 36. Well, don't go there. Isaiah 36:6 says the exact same thing that we just read in 2 Kings 18:21. But go over to Zechariah chapter 8. And we read this verse Sunday. Zechariah chapter 8 and verse 4. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, there shall yet old men and old women dwell in the streets of Jerusalem, and every man with his staff in his hand. So you get the picture. Elderly men, elderly women walking, leaning upon that walking stick. And this is what the psalmist is referring to here in Psalm 23. So the point is, the implication is that this stick, this staff, is firm. Now when it's used as a way of rebuke, then of course it's not. It's a bruised reed. But this stick is firm. It's sturdy. Something you can lean upon. Something that can support you. So that's the picture. The staff in the skillful hand of the shepherd serves multi-purposes in the care, the management, and the maintaining of the well-being of the sheep. The primary use of the staff was to guide the sheep, which again speaks of our need. We are ignorant. We easily lose our way. Like sheep, we have little sense of spiritual direction. And we need guiding. We need guiding all the time. We need guiding every step of the way. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And David knows, being a shepherd, that the staff was used to guide the sheep. He's already referred to it twice in the psalm, in Psalm 23. How that the Lord leads His sheep. So it speaks of the Lord's wise guidance of His own. Why are we so adverse by nature to follow the Lord's guidance? Why do we think that we have to insert our thoughts into the Lord's guidance. To insert our opinion, our desires, has nothing to do with anything. The Lord knows how to guide His people. So notice some statements. Psalm 32, verse 8. Psalm 32, verse 8. I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. Now, this whole verse is about God's guidance. Guidance includes instruction. I will instruct thee and teach thee. You say, well, what's the difference between instruction and teaching? Well, there is a difference. Instruction, you just give basic direction. Teaching, you're showing. You're illustrating, making it more plain. I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. The way that I want you to go. I will guide thee with mine eye. Now in Psalm 48, verse 14, Psalm 48, verse 14, for this God, the God spoken of throughout the psalm, is our God forever and ever. He will be our guide, even unto death. He will be our guide, even unto death. That's how long we need guidance, and He'll be our guide, even unto death. Psalm 73, verse 24. Thou shalt guide me, notice the tone of certainty, with thy counsel. So this is one way that God guides, by His counsel. Again, His instruction, His teaching. And afterward, receive me to glory. Again, He'll guide us unto death. He will guide us with His counsel. Again, unto death. In Psalm 78, verse 14, you have a reiteration of the history of Israel in the 78th Psalm. And in verse 14 it says, in the daytime also He led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. When do we need God's guidance? Well, in the daytime and the nighttime. All day long. We need God's guidance. Verse 53. And He led them unsafely, so that they feared not, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies. May I say that God always leads safely. That doesn't mean that if you follow God's leading, that you may not receive some wounds. That's not what that means, but you'll be safe. You think you're safe when you do it your way. You're never safe when you do it your way. Never. Never ever. But He leads us safely. Notice Psalm 80, verse 1. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, thou that leadest Joseph like a flock, just as a shepherd will lead its flock, with gentleness, with care. Psalm 107, verse 7. He led them forth by the right way, that they might go to a city of habitation. He led them forth by the right way. Has God ever led the wrong way? Never has, never will. God always leads the right way. So what does that say about our ways that are contrary to God's? They're wrong. They're wrong. There's a right way, there's a wrong way. In other words, there's God's way, there's man's way. And He leads forth by the right way. That For this reason, they might go to a city of habitation. They might find a place of rest, a place of supply, a place of provision. How many times God's people refuse to follow the guidance of the Lord because they are afraid it's going to lead them to poverty. But if you follow the Lord leads that they may go to a city of habitation. Well, I don't see how following that way is going to lead me to a city of habitation. You don't have to see it. God has a way. And you just need to follow it. And the sooner we learn this lesson, the better off we'll be. Psalm 136, verse 16. To him which led his people through the wilderness, for his mercy endureth forever. He led his people through the wilderness. And oh, if they would have just followed. God knows the way through the wilderness. God knows the best way through the wilderness. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. There's comfort in the Lord's leading. Isaiah chapter 30. Isaiah chapter 30. Verse 21. And thine ears shall hear a word behind thee saying, This is the way. Walk ye in it. A voice saying, This is the way. Well, I haven't heard that voice. Well, that leads to a question. Have you listened for it? And most would have to answer, well, no, I haven't. Well, you think maybe that could be why you haven't heard it? Ye shall hear a voice. This is the way. But notice our depravity. It's not enough for God to just tell you and I, this is the way. Oh, okay. No, He has to say, this is the way, walk in it. Walk in it. Because we're sheep. We're stubborn. So He not only shows us the way, again, this gets back to the instruction and the teaching. He tells us, He instructs us, now walk in it. Walk in it. It's not enough to just say, this is the way. Isaiah 42, verse 16. And I will bring the blind by a way that they know not. That scares God's people to death. They want a road that they know. But He says, I will bring the blind by a way that they know not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. We don't like change. People who are miserable, they would rather stay miserable than change. God's people don't like change. But God will lead us in ways that we do not know. I will make darkness light before them. What that means is, okay, God's going to lead you down a path. You've never been down that path before. It's an uncomfortable path. It's darkness, but as you walk that path, guess what? It becomes light. But what do we want? We want it to be light before we take our first step. No, you walk down the path, and God causes it to be light, just like crossing the Red Sea again. God didn't cause the waters to part when they were 2 or 3 miles from the bank. I don't believe the water parted until they put their foot in. And then it just gradually parted. So again, we have to follow the Lord's leading. Notice in Isaiah 48, verse 17, Thus saith the Lord, thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, I am the Lord thy God. We need to be reminded of that. Don't forget who He is, which teacheth thee to profit, which leadeth thee by the way that thou shouldst go. We would profit if we would go the way that He leads. There's profit in the Lord's leading. And yet so many of God's people have convinced themselves, well, if I go this way, I won't have a job, I won't have this, I won't have that, I'll be broke, I'll starve to death. No, you won't. And we see it here. It'll profit us in more ways than you and I can ever imagine. So, the shepherd would use the staff to help the sheep stay on the right path. And he would use that staff to exhort them to move forward. And there's great comfort in knowing that the Lord will keep us on the right path. He didn't have to hit the sheep with the staff. All he had to do was touch it. And the sheep knew. He could guide that sheep. Could keep the sheep on the right path. Could exhort the sheep to move forward. This guidance ought to be sought. It's something that we ought to seek, the Lord's guidance. When is it that most of God's people seek the Lord's guidance? When their world is falling apart. That's when they'll seek God. Most, as long as things are going fine, they just go their own way. Just go their own way, do what they please. We ought to start every day seeking the Lord's guidance. Notice in Psalm 5. Psalm 5 and verse 8. Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness. Lead me, O Lord. That is, Lord, if I start getting off the path, you bring me back on. Lead me. Lead me. Psalm 25 and verse 5. Lead me in thy truth and teach me. For thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait. On thee do I wait. That is, I'm not doing anything until you lead me, until you teach me. I'm not going to do a thing. Well, you got to do something. No, you don't. No, you don't. You get yourself in a lot of trouble. That mindset, well, we got to do something. The whole world's, our whole world is falling apart. We've got to act now. We've got to do something. No, you really don't. Not until God leads. Until then, you just wait. You just wait. It takes more faith to wait than it does to follow. Waiting is part of following. But waiting is very difficult. Because most of the time when you're waiting, things get worse. Again, the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. The Egyptians didn't stand still. They kept getting closer and closer and closer. Matters were getting worse. But the Lord said, you stand still till I tell you to move. And that's what it means when we say that we're going to seek the Lord's leading. You don't seek the Lord's leading and then it doesn't come in your time, so you take the matter on yourself. No, you seek the Lord's leading and you wait until He shows you. You just wait. Psalm 27, verse 11, teach me thy way, O Lord. Lead me in a plain path. Lead me in a plain path. Make it clear. And He does. The shepherd might hold the staff against the side of the sheep to give direction and to redirect. And oh, how thankful we ought to be that the Lord has redirected our paths many, many, many a time. Where would we be had it not been for the Lord redirecting? Because we do get off course. We do get off the right path. But the Lord redirects, and the psalmist said, thy staff, it comforts me. The Lord's direction and redirection, there's great comfort. There's great comfort in knowing that the Lord is there to turn us. And we ought to want the Lord to turn us. And we ought never to get upset when the Lord turns us. He can do that by changing plans. He can do it a lot of different ways. But it ought never to upset us. We ought to rejoice in it. We ought to find great comfort in it. So, and again, this redirection ought to be sought as well. In the Psalms you read, turn me, turn me, turn me. And we need to do that, pray that as well. The staff was used as a means of contact with the sheep. The shepherd could lay the staff upon the back of the sheep just as a gentle reminder, I'm here. I'm here. We read in Ezekiel 48:35, the Lord is there. And it's good to be reminded of that. The Lord is there. The Lord is here. And the staff was used, again, just as a point of contact with the sheep. We'll stop there and continue next week with these words. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us